There is a woman sitting in a hospital parking lot at 2 in the morning who has not cried in 6 months. Not because nothing happened. Everything happened. Her marriage fell apart. Her best friend stopped picking up the phone. Her mother told her she was too emotional, too needy, too much. And so she buried it all. She learned to become smaller. She learned to stop feeling anything. And now she sits in a parking lot at 2 in the morning, completely empty inside, wondering if she is finally okay. She is not okay. She is starving. And if you have ever sat in a parking lot like that, or on a bathroom floor, or in a silent car in a driveway too drained to walk inside, then what I am about to share with you is going to change the way you understand your whole life. Because here is the thing nobody ever told you, the sensitivity you spent years trying to destroy, the depth that everyone treated like a problem, the way you feel a room's energy before you even take your coat off. That is not your weakness. That is a neurological gift that most human beings will never develop in their entire lifetime. And the reason it broke you is not because you had too much of it. It is because nobody ever taught you what it actually is, or what to do with it when the world treats it like something is wrong with you. I want to talk to you today about what happens inside the mind of a person who feels deeply, gets broken by that feeling, and then comes out the other side of that darkness, carrying something that most people will spend their whole lives looking for and never find. And before we go anywhere, I need you to understand one thing. The fact that you are still here, still listening, still trying to figure yourself out, that is not weakness. That is the most important piece of information I can give you. Because people who truly have nothing left do not go searching for answers. You are searching, which means something inside you already knows there is more to this story. So let us start at the beginning. Not your beginning, the beginning of the pattern. Researchers who study what they call high emotional sensitivity have found something remarkable. People who score in the top 15% for empathic ability, the ones who feel other people's emotions almost as physically as their own, these people share a very common history of early emotional invalidation. What that means in plain words is this: the people who feel the most deeply are usually the ones who grew up in places where feeling was punished. Think about what that does to a young, developing mind. You have a child who is wired to be extraordinarily sensitive to emotional atmosphere, who picks up on a parent's tension before a single word is spoken, who cries at commercials at age 5 and feels real grief when an animal is hurt. And into that wiring, the world delivers one steady message: stop feeling so much. You are too sensitive. Stop crying. Toughen up. You are overreacting. So the child does what children do to survive. They start to wall it off. They build internal structures designed not to feel less, because they cannot feel less. The wiring does not change, but to hide the feeling, to manage it, to make sure it never inconveniences anyone ever again. And this is the original wound. This is the crack in the foundation, not the feeling itself, the shame about the feeling. Now here is where it gets really important, and this is the part most people never get to hear. When you spend years pushing down a natural and powerful internal ability, it does not go away. It goes underground. And underground, cut off from your conscious awareness, it starts working on its own without your guidance, without your judgment, without any of the protective intelligence you would normally bring to it. So what happens? You start feeling everyone else's emotions but losing track of your own. You absorb the pain of people around you and mix it up with your own emotional state. Someone in the room is anxious, and you suddenly feel a dread you cannot explain. Someone is angry with you, and your entire nervous system fills up with shame, even when you have done absolutely nothing wrong. You are running on someone else's emotional fuel, and you do not even realize it. This is the first thing I want you to name clearly. This experience, this feeling of being a sponge with no filter. This is not what your sensitivity is supposed to do. This is what your sensitivity does when it has been hurt and never shown how to work properly. It is the difference between a river and a flood. The same water, a completely different relationship to the banks. Now we are going to go somewhere that most videos in this space will not go, because it is uncomfortable, but it is the most important part. There is a version of the empath identity that has quietly become a trap, and I say this with full compassion, not judgment. In communities built around empathy and sensitivity, there is a quiet story that gets passed around. It goes something like this. You feel deeply because you are special. Other people are less aware, less spiritually developed, less conscious. The narcissists and the users and the takers are drawn to you because your light pulls them in, and your suffering is proof of your gift. Now, parts of that story hold real truth, but the version that spreads the most leaves out the single most important piece. And what it leaves out is this. Your sensitivity is not just something that happens to you. It is something you can develop real control over. You are not simply a container that the universe fills and empties whenever it wants. You are a person with a nervous system, with psychological patterns, with a history that has shaped your responses, and with the full ability to reshape those responses. When the empath identity becomes a story that explains your suffering, without ever asking you to change anything, it becomes a cage built out of very beautiful words. I want to tell you about a psychological mechanism called the repetition compulsion. It was first described by Freud, but has since been confirmed and expanded by modern trauma researchers, including Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, whose work on the body and trauma is some of the most significant psychology of the last 50 years. The repetition compulsion is the unconscious drive to recreate familiar emotional experiences, even when those experiences cause pain. Your nervous system learns patterns in childhood. It learns what a relationship feels like, what safety feels like, what love feels like. And then for the rest of your life, it searches for experiences that match those same templates, because familiar, even when painful, feels safe to the nervous system. This is why the person who grew up with an emotionally distant parent keeps falling for emotionally distant partners. This is why the person whose feelings were constantly brushed aside ends up surrounded by people who brush their feelings aside. This is why the deeply feeling person who was taught that love means giving everything up keeps finding people who need to be rescued. This is not fate. This is how the brain works. And the reason this matters so much is because the moment you see it as a pattern, it starts to lose its grip on you. Now I want to stay here for a moment, because I know some of you are feeling uneasy right now. Some of you are thinking this sounds like I am holding you responsible, like I am saying the painful relationships in your life are your fault. That is not what I am saying. What I am saying is something far more powerful. I am saying that your nervous system has been running a program that was installed before you were old enough to choose it, and that you now have enough awareness to look at that program and decide whether you want to keep running it. That is not blame. That is the beginning of real power. Because here is what changes when a deeply sensitive person does the real internal work of understanding their own patterns. And I mean truly understanding them. Not just knowing about them in your head, but actually feeling them, tracing them back to where they started, sitting with the grief of seeing clearly where they came from. What changes is this. The world stops being a place that keeps mysteriously hurting you and starts being a place you can move through with your eyes completely open. The deeply sensitive person who has done this work walks into a room differently. They can still feel the emotional atmosphere of that room. That gift is still fully there, but they are no longer swept away by it. They can stand inside someone else's storm without drowning in it. They can feel another person's pain without pulling it into their own body as if it belongs to them. That difference between resonance and merger is the difference between a gift and a wound. And now I want to bring in something that most conversations about sensitivity never go near. And this is where the real psychological depth lives. Carl Jung called it the shadow. And before your mind goes anywhere mystical or abstract, let me give you the most practical explanation possible. Your shadow is everything about yourself that you decided was not acceptable and pushed out of your conscious awareness. For highly sensitive people, the shadow tends to be very large, because when your emotional experience is constantly being told it is too much, you learn to push enormous parts of yourself underground. What usually ends up in the shadow of a sensitive person? Anger. Real, honest, completely appropriate anger at genuine mistreatment, pushed down because anger was not safe, was not allowed, was not something good and caring people are supposed to feel. Selfishness, meaning the basic human need to put your own well-being first sometimes, buried because you learned that your job was to take care of everyone else first. And also your own darkness, your capacity for manipulation, for resentment, for giving love with strings attached. All the things you swore you would never do because you saw how much damage they caused. Pushed so far underground that you genuinely believe you do not have them. But here is the truth. The parts of yourself you refuse to see do not disappear. They drive your behavior from below the surface. And until you are willing to look at them, to honestly sit with the full picture of who you are, including the uncomfortable parts, your sensitivity will keep being used against you. Because you will keep seeing yourself as only the one who gives, only the one who feels, only the one who absorbs. And you will keep being surprised when the resentment builds, when you explode, when you attract exactly the dynamic you were trying to escape. The work, the real work, is not learning to feel less. It is learning to feel with your full self present. It is building the internal structure that lets you be moved by life without being destroyed by it. It is learning to tell the difference between what belongs to you and what belongs to someone else. It is recovering the anger, the boundaries, the voice, the parts of you that went underground so you could be loved, and integrating them back into who you are, so that your sensitivity becomes something you direct rather than something that directs you. And I want to close with this, because it is the thing that I think matters most. You have probably spent a very long time believing that the goal was to become less emotional, less reactive, less open, less you. The goal is not less. The goal is more awareness, more internal structure, more honesty about your own patterns, more willingness to sit with discomfort without running from it or drowning in it. More of the real you, not the managed, walled-off, approved version. The woman in the parking lot at 2 a.m. is not broken. She is full of something she was never taught how to carry, and the moment someone shows her how, everything changes. You are not too much. You were just never given the right tools, and that changes starting right now. The ability to want things for yourself, to put your own needs first sometimes, to say, I matter, and my time matters, and my energy matters. Buried under layers of compulsive giving, judgment, the clear-eyed capacity to look at a person or a situation and say, that is not good for me. That person is not trustworthy. This dynamic is unhealthy, pushed aside in favor of endless compassion. These are not dark things. These are normal human capacities. But in the mindset of someone raised to believe that their value comes from how much they give, how much they feel, how much they absorb, these capacities feel dangerous. So they go underground. And underground they do not disappear. They work against you. The anger you cannot feel openly becomes long-term anxiety or strange physical symptoms. The selfishness you cannot admit becomes resentment that slowly poisons your closest relationships. The judgment you have silenced becomes you ignoring every warning signal your gut sends you about unsafe people. This is the shadow at work. Not evil, not supernatural, just human psychology operating without your awareness. Now, here is the moment where this entire conversation shifts. Because this is the part that most sensitive people, when they really take it in, describe as the most important thing they have ever understood about themselves. The darkness you survived, the relationships that broke you, the periods of numbness, of complete shutdown, of sitting in parking lots at 2 in the morning unable to feel anything. These were not random suffering. They were your mind's attempt to force a confrontation with everything you had pushed into the shadow. When life breaks you open in those moments, the defenses come down. The carefully maintained image of the eternally giving, endlessly patient, deeply caring, compassionate person starts to crack. And through those cracks, for the first time, you can see what is actually underneath. You can see the anger. You can see the desire to be seen and chosen and valued for your own sake, not for what you provide. You can see the part of you that is not gentle and flowing, but fierce and boundaried and capable of saying no with every cell of your body. That emergence is not your brokenness. That is your becoming. And I want to be clear here about what this looks like in real life, because I have described a psychological idea, and now I want to make it real. A person who has done this integration process, who has taken what the darkness forced them to face and actually worked through it, they do not become less sensitive. They do not become cold or guarded or emotionally closed off. What they become is grounded. They become someone who can feel everything, all of it, the joy and the grief and the rage and the tenderness, and remain centered in themselves while feeling it. They become someone whose presence in a painful situation is genuinely calming to other people, not because they are performing calmness, but because they have truly gone down into their own depth and found solid ground. This is what genuine emotional intelligence actually looks like at its fullest development. Not someone who handles everything perfectly and never gets triggered. Someone who knows the terrain of their own inner world well enough to move through almost any emotional storm. When a psychologically aware, deeply sensitive person goes through genuine breaking, and by breaking I mean the kind of experience that strips away your comfortable self-image and leaves you unable to perform the version of yourself you have always shown to the world, something remarkable becomes available. Not automatically, not without effort, but available. What becomes available is the bringing together of the full self. Most people, highly sensitive or not, spend their entire lives showing a carefully chosen version of themselves to the world, while the rest of themselves, the uncomfortable parts, the contradictory parts, the difficult parts, live underground. The breaking event, when faced with awareness rather than numbed or bypassed or spiritually skipped over, is the moment when that carefully chosen self becomes impossible to keep up, and the full self, messy and complex and genuinely human, begins to come forward. People who have gone through this process and done the work to understand it describe a very clear set of changes in how they experience the world. They describe feeling for the first time like they are actually inside their own life, rather than watching it from a slightly disconnected point of view. The ongoing low-level disconnection that many sensitive people live with, the sense of being slightly outside yourself, watching yourself interact with the world, begins to ease as the shadow is brought in and the full self becomes something you can actually live in. I hear that, and I want to say something about it plainly. The work is not the same as the wound. The wound was passive. Things happened to you, patterns formed without your knowledge or agreement.
pain built up without your being able to process it. That passivity, that happening to you quality, is what made it painful. The work is active. It is something you choose and engage with on your own terms. And that difference between things happening to you and you actively choosing to understand and work through your experience is not a small difference. It is the entire difference between being a subject of your own history and being the author of your own life. And the other thing I want to say is this.
You have already proven that you can survive the passive version of this process. You already went through the breaking without any of the tools or frameworks or understanding I have just given you. You did it raw. You did it confused. You did it without a map. You survived that. What makes you think you cannot move through the active, chosen, conscious version of the same territory, especially now when you actually understand what the territory is? The darkness you went through was not wasted experience, not a single hour of it. Every moment of it built in you something that cannot be built any other way. The ability to be genuinely present with suffering, not the performed presence of someone saying the right words while keeping themselves emotionally safe. The real presence of someone who has sat in the same fire and knows what it actually feels like. That presence is rare. That presence changes people. But it only becomes a gift, truly a gift rather than a wound you keep reopening, when you understand it. When you can hold it with awareness. When you can feel another person's pain with your full presence. And also feel your feet on the ground and know clearly this is their pain and I am choosing to be present with it, not drowning in it because it is mine. That difference is everything, and it is something you can learn. Not quickly, not without effort, but completely and absolutely learnable. Here is what I want you to take away from everything we have talked about. You were not broken by your sensitivity. You were broken by the gap between your sensitivity and an environment that did not know what to do with it. That gap produced wounds. Those wounds produced patterns. Those patterns produced the darkness. The darkness produced the breaking. And the breaking, if you face it rather than running from it, produces something that has no good word in the English language. The closest word is wholeness. Not the wholeness of someone who is never damaged. The wholeness of someone who has gone down into the depth of their own damage, faced every piece of it, brought in the shadow that lived there, and come out the other side, understanding themselves fully. That understanding is power. Quiet power. Power that does not need to announce itself. Power that shows up as the quality of your attention when someone in crisis calls you at midnight. Power that shows up as your ability to say no to something that would harm you without 4 days of painful guilt. Power that shows up as the genuine steadiness you create in the relationships that matter to you, not by pushing down your sensitivity, but by having learned to direct it.